There were quite a few crazes for kids in the 90s. Tamagotchis, Pogs, Goosebumps, and of course, theme-based management games. Welcome, my name's AZAsh and welcome to another PC game retrospective video. Now, there were several theme-branded games released in the 90s from developer Bullfrog Productions, with everything from the well-known theme park to the Japanese exclusive theme aquarium. But perhaps the game with the longest living legacy is 1997's Theme Hospital. And I say longest legacy because over the last 25 years or so, there's been a variety of other games which walk the line between straight-up copying and improving on that original formula, as well as a community mod designed to uplift the original title to a more modern standard. More on this shortly. For me, Theme Hospital was my first real entry into the world of management simulator games. And while I've played a lot of other games in this genre, including some crossover titles like Frostpunk, which is part management, part simulation, and probably part survival, I still haven't played another management sim that quite replicates that same experience that Theme Hospital offers, especially in the pick up and play category. On the topic of pick up and play, Theme Hospital was initially released for both the PC in 1997 and the PlayStation a year later in 1998, and by all accounts, both versions were well received by critics. Ports to the PlayStation for these type of games were generally hit or miss, with the controls often being criticized as imprecise when compared to a keyboard and mouse, but for the most part, it seems that both the controls and gameplay made the transition to Sony's console well. The version we're playing today is the PC version, but as you can probably tell, there's a little bit of magic happening with regards to the widescreen presentation, and that's thanks to the community-created mod CorsixTH. Now, I'm generally cautious with modern mods, as quite a lot of them make sweeping changes to not only the presentation, but the gameplay. However, in the case of CorsixTH, not only do you have complete control over the changes it makes, but most of the changes relate to presentation and accessibility, things like modern resolutions and new language support. There are a few gameplay tweaks, but honestly, they are so minor that they fall into the quality of life bucket as opposed to the meaningful changes bucket, and that suits the game just fine. All that's required to use the mod is a copy of the game, and honestly, I can't see any reason why you wouldn't use the mod, so I would suggest this as the ideal way to play the game in modern times. Now, there is a story to Theme Hospital, not a particularly deep or engaging one, but a story nevertheless. Basically, you as the player have been employed by the Health Ministry of Theme World to run their hospitals. The better you do, the higher your salary goes, with the ultimate aim of retiring before the age of 50. You start the game on somewhat of a game board, and with each level or hospital progression, you move closer to retirement. It's a relatively simple premise, but it works fine to keep things moving along. Before we continue, a massive thank you to everyone who supports the channel. If you enjoy this type of content, please do consider liking the video or subscribing to the channel. With that out of the way, let's build our hospital, hire some staff, and head back to 1997 to remember Theme Hospital. The gameplay loop for Theme Hospital is a simple but compelling one. Build hospitals, manage staff, and make decisions. Of course, the twist here is that virtually every medical condition is ridiculously comical, such as slack tongue, which requires a slack tongue clinic to trim off the slack, or King Complex, which sees people dressing up as Elvis and needing a psychiatrist to convince them to change out of their costume. The building side of things requires the construction of a variety of hospital facilities, from diagnosis rooms, treatment rooms, and even things like toilets, with more rooms becoming available as you progress through the game, thanks to the research mechanic. More on this later. Of course, all of these medical facilities require the appropriate staff. A GP clinic requires a doctor, a ward requires a nurse, reception requires a receptionist, and so on. Like with the comical nature of the medical conditions, the hiring process is just as comical, with the hiring screen presenting a quick overview of someone's skill, required pay, and short biography. For example, you might have someone described as rubbish at the job, but only costing $45 a month, whereas someone who cares deeply about their job, and also apparently heckles poor comedians, will cost upwards of $80 a month. The difference being, in the case of a receptionist, that the more experienced one will direct patients faster, therefore reducing wait times. This carries over to other roles too, such as doctors, with a higher experience level, meaning they can diagnose patients more quickly and accurately. Doctors also have the added choice of specialization. For example, if you want to have an operating theatre, you need 2 doctors specializing in surgery. If you want to conduct research, you will need a doctor specialized in research, and so on. But the complication here is that once you have hired these people, you need to keep them happy, and this is done in a few ways. Firstly, having a nice working environment with things like plants and staff rooms to relax is a good starting point, but they will also benefit from things like having a clean environment, which can be solved by employing a few handymen. Oh, and one thing which I actually overlooked was temperature. Now, I come from Australia, and radiators are a largely foreign concept to me. Now, I never really could find the right temperature in any of my hospitals. My patients were either too hot or too cold. So I compromised and set the temperature to maximum and just installed a lot of drink vending machines. Problem solved. Occasionally, regardless of how well you treat your staff, they will give you an ultimatum of you giving them a raise or them leaving. Now, this can be managed by giving them the occasional bonus, something which I made extensive use of, or you can just wait until they ask. The challenge with waiting until they ask is that in the later levels of the game, there can be a lot of things happening at once, and the time the game allows you to make the decision isn't always long enough if you have other things on your mind, which can result in them walking off the job. On some of the later levels where you have senior doctors with specializations leaving, this can be disastrous, so it's something I always made a point of making sure my staff were always happy. The last part of the core loop is making management decisions. Now, these decisions range from setting the prices for particular surgeries to making decisions on what you should do if you are unsure on a diagnosis. Guess the correct decision and the patient is saved. Make the wrong decision and you might kill them, something which will impact both your reputation and your cash flow. And here's something I actually never realized until recently. Sometimes when you're presented with a diagnosis decision, you can elect to send the patient to the research department. Now, I always thought, oh, that sounds good. We can try and work out what exactly is wrong with them. So if the probability of a cure was less than 50%, I'd often select that. And then every now and again, I'd get a message pop up from the handy hospital advisor saying that my auto-autopsy machine had been discovered by the public and it's impacted my reputation. I didn't really pay too much attention to this until a later level where reputation was critical, and I decided to look it up. And yeah, turns out when you send a patient to research, you actually kill them and put their body in an auto-autopsy machine to research more about the disease they had, with the hopes of making a more accurate diagnosis for others in the future. So yeah, I thought I was helping people when I was actually sending them straight to their grave. Right. Now, accidentally or intentionally killing a patient certainly isn't the end of the game. However, it will affect your reputation, and this sometimes ties into game progression. At the beginning of every new level, or hospital as the game puts it, you are given a brief overview of what you can expect to face, as well as a criteria for progression. For example, in one of the earlier levels, you need a reputation of 300, 40 patients cured, and a bank balance of over $10,000. Oh, and on the topic of finances, this is something which you certainly need to stay on top of, being sure to balance your expenses with your income. You do have the ability to take out a loan from the bank, however, you will pay interest on this loan, which can make a bad situation even worse. Fall below $20,000 and it's game over. Theme Hospital is interesting in the fact that the challenge doesn't necessarily come from each game mechanic per se, rather the challenge of stacking multiple game mechanics together, something the game does very well to strike a good balance between pacing and player progression. There are simple examples of these stacking mechanics, like hiring staff but needing to hire staff with specialties in specific areas, such as research. And then there are more complex examples of stacking where you need to hire research staff, but there are none available, so you need to find a consultant within the hospital, someone who can teach other doctors, and then build a training room and hire a junior to learn how to become a researcher. None of these things in isolation are difficult, but when you stack them together and add the pressure of other things happening in the hospital, the challenge quickly ramps up. Probably the biggest skill check in the game is about halfway through it, when you start a new hospital with 3 consultant-level doctors already on staff. This is a good thing. Only for the entirety of the level, you can't recruit any doctors with specializations, meaning the only way you can access doctors who can operate specific rooms, and importantly the research room, is to train them using consultants. Only the consultants can't see regular patients when they are training. Not to mention having all of these doctors on your books without being able to charge for their services quickly puts a strain on your finances. I failed this level a few times, all of which because I simply ran out of money. Without the staff to operate treatment rooms, I couldn't bring in enough revenue to cover my overheads, which was further compounded by the reputation costs of having patients die because I couldn't diagnose them properly. After a few failed attempts, I decided to slow things right down, and using this new strategy, I was finally able to pass the level. Now, in addition to the more long-term decisions, the game does present the player with a few risk versus reward opportunities throughout each level. There is an option to accept an invitation from a VIP, for example, who will walk around the hospital observing, and if they think the hospital is good, they'll increase your reputation upon their departure, or if they dislike your hospital, your reputation will suffer. Then there are emergencies, which offer the player an opportunity to treat a certain amount of patients who arrive by helicopter within a certain time limit. Successfully treat them all within the time limit and you will receive a cash and reputation bonus. However, if you fail, your reputation will take a large hit. But perhaps the largest hit to reputation can come from failure to deal with an epidemic. Basically, if an infectious disease is found within your hospital, you have a choice of reporting it to the authorities and copping a hefty fine and a reputation impact, or you can roll the dice and try and treat everyone in the hospital before the authorities find out. However, if they do find out, you will take an enormous reputation hit and a very hefty fine. So generally, coming clean early is the way to go. There are also random events like earthquakes, which can damage equipment or even destroy entire rooms. And as I said before, these are not terrible events in isolation. However, when they stack with other things, they can quickly become a major issue. The whole gameplay loop, while simple enough, is a lot of fun. And despite the fact you are basically building a new hospital every level, it never really felt repetitive. In terms of what doesn't work as well as I think it could, honestly, I don't have much to say here. Theme Hospital is a really well-refined and polished game, and something that echoes quality control that just isn't common in modern titles. If I had to criticize something about the gameplay, and I'm really digging deep here, the user interface isn't the best when it comes to creating new rooms and adding items like plants and radiators. If the game offered some type of default room additions, this would have probably reduced a few extra clicks with each room, but as I said, I'm really reaching here. This is a very solid gameplay experience. Graphically, while the game isn't really breaking any new ground feature-wise, what's here is fit for purpose and complements the overall game setting. There's a really unique art style used for the cutscenes, and I don't really know how to describe it other than saying it's similar to a cartoon, although it's one of those things that, for me at least, is instantly recognizable as Theme Hospital. The isometric view of the game and overall camera control do a surprisingly good job of giving the player a good sense of what's going on in the hospital. And while we've progressed to more 3D and rotating camera approaches nowadays, what's here, apart from the occasional scenario of not seeing where you've placed something in the corner of a room, works really well. The sound design, like the overall gameplay, is also appropriately hilarious, with everything from toilet noises to PA system announcements by reception being announced. There's also a soundtrack which, while not being overly brilliant, is fairly inoffensive, and with several options to change the volume or simply play your own tunes, it's nothing to worry about.
Doctor required in GP's office. Doctor, attending psychiatry, please. Doctor, attending psychiatry, please.
Now, in case I somehow didn't make it obvious, Theme Hospital is a great game that has aged exceptionally well, aided in part by the amazing CorsixTH mod. Yes, there are newer games in the genre which greatly modernize presentation, but if you strip back presentation from the newer games, the original Theme Hospital was delivering the same gameplay experience over 20 years earlier. Now, yes, these newer games have much more depth to the gameplay, but for me, the simplicity of Theme Hospital was one of the best things about it. I have a strong sense of nostalgia for Theme Hospital, in part because it released in an era of gaming where many developers were taking risks and trying new things. Of course, not all of these things paid off, but I'd argue that Theme Hospital is a great example of a risk which did. But that's enough from me. Do you agree or disagree with my opinions? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.